My compliments to the previous speakers. I think each of them gave a very different perspective on the applications of steel, structural steel. So my presentation today would be on steel hollow sections. Some of you in the audience would have used it quite extensively, and some of you are not probably aware of steel hollow sections. So the presentation that I have for you would be on how steel or hollow sections, its usage, especially has evolved in India, basically following the trends that we have seen in the global market. The first, before we get into the technical aspect of steel hollow sections, my presentation is not going to be technical, but I thought probably, when you look at steel, one of the reasons probably it is not very much appreciated or used is that it's seen as, very technical, very complex to understand, anything but beautiful, right? Steel is seen as strong, anything but beautiful. So I just thought that probably I'll just start with this question and then run through a few images which are very complex designs which are in the minds of an architect or a creative person who puts it on paper. So any structure that we have seen starts with their creative mind, the person who would think about it in his mind and then put it on paper. And then the challenges for the structural engineers, the fabrication people, the suppliers of steel, to see how best they can work together as a team to put it and close to reality, the design that was conceived on paper. What we feel as far as steel hollow section is that it's a product which definitely is strong, because when you say hollow section, there's always a perception that it is not strong enough, because there's a tendency for people to believe that for strength you need it to be solid. It should be either a rod or something like a beam or angle or channel. So anything which is hollow section has this perception that it is not strong enough. But then hollow section is definitely strong, and I will show you a few slides on how it has been applied in very complicated and very strength intensive structures. At the same time, what it aims to marry both the architectural creativity in terms of the look and feel of the product, as well as take care of the product strength requirements from the structural engineer's perspective. And most importantly, it has been able to, we have been able to, in the last few years in India, get the fabricators on board, because the big challenge, as someone mentioned, that while it's nice to design structures with steel, but when you get to India, you're finding it difficult to actually get it fabricated. So what I will be trying to cover is to show you the story of how steel hollow sections usage has evolved in India, what started off probably as applications in very big structures. Today it has gone to even the grassroots, and even in some of your individual households, steel hollow sections are being used. Probably you're not aware, or probably when you go back you can check, but the usage of steel hollow sections is actually creeping in and it's becoming more of a common man's product as well. So the theme of the presentation is how steel hollow sections combines both beauty and strength for structural applications. I think in one of the presentations, I think Mr. Venkat mentioned, the biggest constraint that most, especially in steel in India, is that steel is always seen as very not a very a product which has been made by reputed manufacturers. It is, if you see the production of steel, for some time back, almost 80 to 90% was done by what is being seen as the unorganized players. And over the years, this unorganized sector has, been shrunk, and the organized players have started coming into the market. Initially, it was the Steel Authority of India and Tata Steel. But if you see in the last, I would say 10 to 15 years, the number of steel manufacturers who have the entire integration, right from the iron ore to the steel making, and then finally tubulars and other downstream products, they have just multiplied. So India is becoming more organized in terms of the steel production and availability of different steel products, and it slowly, over a period of time, will become the way things are in the Western markets, where almost 80% is supplied by organized players. Looking at the global, steel application, I think many of the pictures that were shown, when you look back at India, say 15 years ago, some of you who are less than 30 probably will not appreciate, but the old airports of, say, Bangalore or Chennai or Calcutta or Bombay, it used to be very similar. It's all be a very concrete box. So you go to a railway station, it will be a station which has been built 100 years before or 150 years before. So that was how India was, and for anyone visiting the country saw this. That was the first impression that you formed, and everywhere you saw all boxes of concrete. But then when you go abroad, this is what you would see. Whether it's airport. So the first impression that you form of a country when you say it has become a developed country is that when you land, you see the airport and you say, yeah, this is a developed country. So these are the airports you see there. You have all the various Olympics being held. When you looked at the Beijing Games, I think everyone talked about the bird's nest. The recent Football World Cup, they were talking about the sliding the roof of the stadium. So the focus is turning not just to the event, but also to the way the structures are being put up for the event. This is a bridge. Just look at how architecturally beautiful it's looking. Stadium again, pedestrian bridge. I was surprised, how they can make pedestrian bridges like this. This is a rock and roll Hall of Fame in Ohio. The metro. I've been here in Dubai and it's so beautiful. When you feel nice to walk in and walk out of such stations. And this is the Singapore flyer. So when you look at different countries, what defines defines a city is the kind of structures that we have. And then you look at India, you still feel that we have a long way to go. But I would say that, so especially for someone who have come from the outside the country, there has been progress. And if you see and you're seeing for yourself, there's been a lot of progress, but it wasn't so easy. It wasn't so easy that we could just show these pictures and get everyone in India start using these steel hollow sections or the structural steel. It has taken time, it's taken effort, but I can only say that we are in the right direction, and some of the pain points, the challenges that was mentioned, there has been thought on the same in the country, and I feel that we are moving in that way. Now, can we replicate in India? About 15 years back in the early 2000s, as I said, we in Tata Steel were looking for expanding our business, and we looked at this opportunity and we said, why aren't people using steel hollow sections yet? For some of you who might not know, steel hollow section is not a new product. Tata Steel started manufacturing steel hollow section in the year 1978, and for almost 25 years there was hardly any demand. I mean, it was seen that when we ask people, they say there's absolutely no demand. So we went around asking people, and this is what we kind of got as a feedback. When you look at a structure, as I mentioned, it starts with an architect who visualizes the structure. Then there's a structural engineer who actually gets into the detailed design, chooses the material, and then there's a fabricator who, based on the design, gets the structure up in place. When we spoke to each of the key stakeholders, what we saw was that there was a lack of awareness about hollow sections. There was a lack of awareness about the best way to fabricate them, and therefore, right from the architect who wouldn't know about hollow sections, so since if he didn't think of hollow section, obviously the structural engineer wouldn't think of hollow sections, and obviously the fabricator wouldn't know how to use them. So this thing continued. This was a cyclical chain that continued, and therefore the demand for the product kind of languished. And the conventional sections, which is the C sections, the angles, they continue to be in use. However, when you look at the global scenario, what they say is the benchmark for hollow section usage is about 10% of total structural steel usage. And in India at that point of time, the demand for structural hollow sections was not even 1% or even lower. So what happened over the last 10 years has been that through the effort of the industry, starting with licensing and interacting with the key stakeholders. So what we realized was it's not going to help if you're going to go and reach out to everybody and talk to them about steel hollow sections. What we did was we went to some of the key stakeholders and we convinced them, and we said that if they start using steel hollow sections, then slowly the things will percolate down. And that is what has happened over the years. We started with the big infrastructure projects like airports, metros, the key, the key stations, and then slowly, as I mentioned, steel hollow sections have started, finding use in, very simple applications. Probably not from a structural perspective, but if you look at in a market like Kerala, if you go to Kerala, you see every house has a small roof on top of the house. And we saw that earlier, about 4 years back, there was hardly any usage of hollow sections. We just did a kind of a market survey, and we found that there's almost 15,000 tons of hollow sections being used. And that's at a very primitive level. The designer, there's no designer involved, there's no architect involved. It's all the local fabricator who started using it. So it's actually percolated. What the designs we saw with the big institutions and the big infrastructure has actually percolated down. And this is, as I mentioned, happened because 15 years back, steel in India was, very supply driven. There was hardly much steel available. But many of the steel manufacturers started investing in capacity. And the availability of hot roll coils really took off in the country. And this has led to many tube manufacturers because there were not many tube manufacturers making steel tubes, and the hot roll coil availability improved, and they started putting in tube mills. So earlier, if you looked at where the tube mills were available, they were in certain pockets. In the south, it was Hyderabad. In west, it would be Gujarat. In north, it would be Mandi Govindgarh. In east, it would be Calcutta. But today, in almost every city, I can say confidently, there is a tube mill. So availability of steel tube or steel hollow sections has become perverse. And you need a channel, right? I mean, you need from the steel mill, how do you take it to the end user, the fabricator or the contractor? You need a distribution network. That's also in place. So what's happened that when it started from the conversion in terms of the big industry and the support of the industry, today the usage of hollow section has grown by 100 times in the last 10 years. So from almost 20,000 tons, the industry in India is almost selling about 2.3 million tons, and it is really growing at a very rapid pace. Now, I'll just go through quickly a few slides on some of the various, the applications or the skyline I would talk about. This was the first thing I would to just highlight is about the charka. Tata Steel, as I mentioned, when we wanted to propagate the usage of hollow sections, we organized a competition called Notion of the Nation, and wherein we invited the top architects in the country and construction engineers to come up with what they have in their mind in terms of what should be, a theme for the nation. And the winning design by an architect, renowned architect, Mr. Nuru Kareem, this was a design of a charka. Now, you can look at the structure and, on paper you can imagine how it would have been. Now, to get it designed was probably a challenge, but the fabrication, it took us almost 2.5 to 3 years to erect it. And this is currently standing in Cross Maidan in Mumbai. So whenever you go next to Churchgate station, you can drop by and have a look at that. So this is probably one landmark we can probably talk about Mumbai. So every city we are trying to see how we can talk about structures which will make us feel proud that yes, India as a country is developed. This is the initial phase of the Mumbai airport. Mr. Surya Prakash talked about the next phase, but this was the airport when you would have looked at in the year 2005-06 when the first airport in Mumbai got modernized. This is the view. This is the Kolkata airport, which came up much recently. Here what we did was, in addition to, because I think there was a mention about not having the range of steel tubes in India, there's a challenge because the manufacturing capacities are limited. There was a tie-up done with Tata Steel Europe, and we bought in sections from Tata Steel Europe, and this is a combination of entire hollow sections being used for the entire airport, mix of tubes from India and from Tata Steel Europe. I talked about how this whole design has now percolated down to at the grassroots. This is a bus station in Kerala. Now, does it look like a bus station? I mean, if you can just look back 10-15 years back, a typical bus station would be one like a big warehouse, right? Now, the person said, I want to make it look different. So he came to us, we offered a design, and we were able to kind of create that, and conceptualize and execute this design. So this is how these are the railway stations in Turbhe, the railway platform. This is in Calcutta. The skywalks, I think residents of Mumbai are quite aware of these skywalks that have come up. While I was talking about steel hollow sections being beautiful, but there's always this question about, is it strong enough? Can it take loads? So this is, a pipe, sorry, I'm not, yeah, you can just see this pipe, and the structure, this is the structure on which the pipe is kept. And what is interesting is to note that the kind of seamless fabrication that is being done, it's evolved in the country. There's always a perception that how do I fabricate, how do I joint? But there are companies which have developed expertise, and today the kind of finish and look and feel that you can get from hollow sections is extremely good. These are some industrial structures, conveyor galleries, warehouses, yes. And even in warehouses, what has happened is there's been a good, I would say, collaboration happening between pre-engineered buildings. So there are areas where structural hollow sections can definitely play a role in a PEB building, and there are structures which has been created where both pre-engineered buildings have used hollow sections. Coming to the, I will just quickly develop on the product range. So this is the product range that is available predominantly in India. It goes up to 12 inch and the thickness up to 10 mm. And the yield strength is at yield strength 310. And in all the three areas, I think there is a lot of journey to be looked forward to. I think you mentioned about the yield strength of 450 being planned in global markets. We in India are thinking about 355 and thicknesses, of course. But again, I think the whole journey has to again start. What started 15 years back in terms of getting hollow sections introduced in the country, I think to move from this level to the next level of engagement needs to start, wherein the architects, the consultants, and the structural engineers need to push the industry in terms of what are the things that you're looking for, in terms of size ranges, in terms of thicknesses, in terms of grades. And the industry, I would say, is very confident, because 10 years back, the kind of steel availability in India was very limited. Nobody would think of putting a tube mill because the availability of steel was a constraint. Today, the steel capacity in India is really growing rapidly, and there is always the option of imports, which was not there earlier. Today, India is importing quite a bit of steel. So I think we are poised for the next set of growth that can happen, and some of the structures that we have seen in, say, the Burj Khalifa or the 1,000 meters, probably the highest structure sometime in the future can come up in India as well. Now, as I mentioned about the challenges, these are some of the challenges, and I'll just want to talk about the couple of the way forwards that we are trying to do in India. Someone talked about, I think Mr. Venkat talked about the curriculum still being outdated, and we in our way are trying to have interactions with the architects and structural engineers, the architectural students and the civil engineering students. This is an area where I think the structural engineering community needs to play a role, and how you need to take this learning back and probably work with the institutions and say how these modern cutting edge concepts are given back, because still I think the design is still with the conventional sections. They need to be exposed to new ways of designing with hollow sections and other forms of section that are coming up. The other challenge is while the big industries are having their capabilities imported, at a grassroots level, if you want to see more steel being used, then you need to educate them as well. As I mentioned about the fabricators, at the low level they are not very educated, and they don't go to any institutes to train, and there's no one training them. How we can simplify the entire process of using steel, and how we can have some kind of workshops or some kind of skill development for them. So we had made a proposal to the CII about a month back, and we hope that through the support of the industry, we can have a movement wherein through the Skill Development Council, we can also reach out to grassroots level and see how they can also be trained in some of the cutting edge stuff. Now I'll just give you a brief on the company that I represent. I represent Tata Steel, and Cubes is part of it's a strategic business unit of Tata Steel, and we are in 3 different verticals, and the vertical of Tata Structura is what we call the steel hollow sections. And this business was almost non-existent. As I mentioned, about 10 years back, we were not selling anything. Today, we are almost about 0.2 million tons of hollow sections, and we see this business growing. So, as someone talked about the usage of structural steel in India, I think it is only going to multiply, and if we work together, I think we can take the usage to much higher levels in the country. I just want to end with a small video which just introduces the brand and what we stand for as a brand, Tata Structura.
Immemorial. Man's imagination has given way to reality with the help of instruments that have changed the way we live today. The wheel changed the face of transportation. The silicon chip changed the world of products. And now, Tata Tata Structurer hollow steel sections that are changing the face of architecture. If the future is what you can imagine, reality is how we make it happen. Tata Structurer, the shape of things to come.
If you have any questions,